So welcome back to another topic, and today we will discuss about menstruation cycle. So basically, maybe some of you, my viewers, will not know what is actually a menstruation. So menstruation is an like you can say is like an indicator that when a woman has reached a mature state yet. So it means that the woman has reached the puberty stage, and actually the puberty stage based on the average data girl in the world is about 14 years old. And when they reach their age, which is 14, it will enable the reproductive system to be activated, and it will later progress to the menstruation cycle. Okay, so in the menstruation cycle, we have four steps and four stages. So as you can see in here, there are four parts, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is the number, which starts from 1 and ends with 228. So, based on international agreement and based on the average data, it is stated that women usually do the cycle within the range of 28 days. So, maybe some of you will think, then how to determine the first day? So we determine the first day based on the first day when a woman bleeds out. By what I meant from bleeds is when she got her first menstruation, or the bleeds from the uterus lining and the eggs, and that will be the first day. Okay. So the four stages will be: first, the menstruation itself, or the period, and then the second will be the follicular phase, or it refers to the egg development, and the third will be the ovulation phase, where the egg will be released from the ovaries, and the fourth will be the luteal phase, or when everything has done from the egg development, and finally the walls will thicken, and if it will not be fertilized, then it will shed and bleeds out. Okay, so now actually behind this process there are four main hormones affecting all of this process, which are as you can see on the graph, the LH, or luteinizing hormone, and the FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, and the other two are estrogen and progesterone. However, actually behind all of this there is the mastermind, or you can say the controller, and it is also really crucial, and even you can say that it is even more crucial to start this cycle rather than just the hormone itself, and it is the brain. And so the brain has one of the part which we name it as the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus also has a gland, and beside the hypothalamus it has another gland, or a neighboring gland, called as pituitary gland. Okay, so back to the graph for a little bit. As you can see, maybe, and you may notice that one of the most earliest hormone that goes up and rise up is actually the FSH, or it stands for follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, and maybe you might wonder why it rise one of the first. So we must first know how the egg develops, because actually there is the correlation between after the menstruation and the egg development, and how the progression of these graphs goes. Okay, so actually, as I have mentioned before, that in the brain, the hypothalamus also produced one of the crucial hormone that release the FSH and LH, and it is the gonadotropin releasing hormone, or usually it is abbreviated as GnRH. Yes, and then when it is released, it will trigger and stimulate the neighboring gland, which is the pituitary gland, and it will produce the FSH and LH. Okay, so now this is where the correlation begins. So as you can see that women actually produce their eggs because in the ovary there are a lot of follicles. So follicles, you may describe it as a sac, SAC, that is filled with some air and liquid, and you can say that it is an immature egg, or still in the first stage of an egg. So as you can see in here, this one, okay, in this like the egg thingy, it is what we call as the primary oocyte cell. So this one in the middle, in the center, it is the primary oocyte, while the outer wall, the most outer wall, is what we call as theca cell, THECA. And for the white thing, actually, there is a small cell, a very small cell called as granulosa cell. Okay. So, as I have mentioned before, the correlation between the brain and this are actually the theca cell have the luteinizing receptor hormone. So, it will detect and receive the luteinizing hormone. So as I have mentioned before, then the theca cell will bind with the luteinizing hormone, and it turns out the process of binding will further creates another hormone called as androstenedione. And for the granulosa or the white thing, it turns out that it have the follicle stimulating hormone receptor. So it will bind with that hormone, and it turns out that it will also produces a hormone called as aromatase. Then the chain reaction will start to begin from here. The aromatase turns out that it will change and produce the androstenedione into estrogen, and that is why, as you can see before, that the level of estrogen suddenly increased, because during this process the egg will be matured enough and it will produce a lot of estrogen. And now, however, as you can see, suddenly the FSH decreased a lot. And it turns out that the high level of estrogen gives a negative feedback to the pituitary gland to stop producing a lot of FSH. Why? Because it turns out that decreasing FSH will make the other follicles that tries to mature and develop to die. And so the competition will be over, and those who will survive the egg, the matured egg, will be the one that has the most follicle stimulating hormone receptor. Okay. So now let us go back in here in this graph. Okay. So after the egg finally matured enough, it will be ready for the next step, which is ovulation. And in this, ovulation is located on the 14th day, usually in the middle. So 28 divided by 2 is 14. In the green line represented in here, as you can see, the FSH and LH will suddenly increase, but the one that will increase the most will be the LH. And why? Because this hormone will be the one that triggers the matured egg and the ready egg to be secreted and to be ovulated. So it will undergo the ovulation phase, in which the egg will go out from the ovary and finally takes its journey to the uterus through the fallopian tube. And as you can see, the estrogen and progesterone, for the estrogen, it suddenly decreased because now the egg finally doesn't produce any estrogen any estrogen hormone again, since it is already matured and it doesn't have now any connection with the pituitary gland. However, after the ovulation phase, we finally reach the fourth stage or the latest stage, which is the luteal phase. And as you can see, now the dominant hormone is not estrogen, FSH, or LH. Instead, it is progesterone. So, you might see that now the progesterone suddenly rise up really quickly, and the estrogen also rise, but only a little bit, while the LH and FSH finally drops. Why? Because now the follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone is not needed anymore, since the egg has already done its proper egg development, and now it is on another process. And in here, the role of progesterone and estrogen is to prepare the uterine lining. And so for the estrogen, it will be the one that thickens the wall of the endometrium that is located on the uterus, while the progesterone will maintain the thickening. So without progesterone, it will suddenly shed out and bleeds. And that is actually what happens if an egg is not fertilized. Because actually the aim of the thickening of the wall is to prepare the endometrium to catch the egg later if it has been fertilized by the sperm or the male gametes. Okay, and if it turns out that there are no fertilization occurred, the progesterone level will finally decrease, resulting in the shed of the thickening wall. And that is what we called as menstruation, since menstruation is actually the shed and the bleeding out of the dead egg cell and also the wall of the uterus. And finally, the chain is repeated again. It will goes to the to this first day again, since it is the first day of the bleeds, which starts the cycles over and over again, the repetition, and until a girl or a woman reach its menopause. So menopause is a condition in which women could not produce their egg again. So you can say that its reproductive system is finally over, and they cannot reproduce, or they cannot develop a fetus or make a baby again. Okay, so that's all for the menstrual cycle. I hope you might understand it. This is an explanation in a nutshell, and thank you for listening, and stay tuned for another topic lesson. Thank you.